Oh God, I don't even know how to begin this. My hands are shaking so badly right now, not just from the age, but from the sheer weight of what I'm about to confess to you. I am 99 years old. I am sitting in room number 14 of a sterile, cold care home, and I have absolutely nothing left to my name. No assets, no savings, no power. And worst of all, no family who cares. If you are listening to my voice right now, please, I beg of you, do not skip this. Do not turn away. I need you to really hear me, because the mistake I made 40 years ago is something nobody warns you about, and it is a trap that is waiting to snap shut on you too. Before my heart gives out, and before my voice fails me completely, I need to know who is out there in the dark with me. Please, pause for just a moment right now. Go down to the comments, type your age, and write down the city or country you are listening from. It would bring an old, forgotten woman an immense amount of comfort to know how far my voice has travelled today. Just to know that before I leave this world, someone, somewhere, actually stopped to care. Write it down right now, because once I reveal what my own children did to me, you will understand why every single second of human connection matters. Look around this room with me. Close your eyes and imagine it. It is a tiny, square box. The walls are painted a dull, clinical yellow that looks like nicotine stains. If I turn my head to the left, I see a plastic wardrobe that holds the 3 faded cardigans I have left. If I turn my head to the right, I see a heavy, fire-resistant door with a little plastic placard that reads, Room 14, Mary. That is what I have been reduced to. A number on a door. A clinical line item on a local council budget. Every single morning, I wake up at 6 a.m. to the sound of heavy, rubber-soled shoes squeaking down the linoleum corridor outside. Then comes the smell. God, the smell. It is a permanent, suffocating mixture of industrial-grade chemical disinfectant and over-boiled, mushy cabbage. It gets into your clothes. It gets into your hair. It settles at the back of your throat until you forget what fresh air even feels like. I sit here in this high-backed vinyl chair, the one the occupational therapist assigned to me because my spine is collapsing under the weight of nearly a century of living, and I stare out of a narrow, double-glazed window. My view is a gravel car park and a row of industrial wheelie bins. Every Tuesday, I watch the refuse truck come and dump the trash, and every Tuesday, a sickening thought creeps into my mind. I am just like those bins. I am something that served its purpose, ran out of use, and was put out on the curb to be collected and forgotten. But the most terrifying part of my day isn't the smell, and it isn't the ugly view. It is the silence. The silence in a care home is heavy. It's punctuated only by the distant, muffled sound of a television blaring a daytime quiz show down the hall, or the occasional heartbreaking wail of another resident in room 22 who forgets where she is and calls out for a mother who died 50 years ago. My mind, you see, is still perfectly sharp. Thank the Lord for that, or perhaps curse him for it. Because if my mind were gone, if the dementia had taken me, I wouldn't have to sit here for 14 hours a day in total clarity, remembering every single detail of how I ruined my own life. I wouldn't have to feel the agonizing physical ache of betrayal. My body has completely given up. My knees are swollen, fluid-filled sacks that refuse to bear my weight. My fingers are twisted by arthritis, resembling the gnarled roots of an old oak tree, shaking so violently that I can barely hold a plastic cup of water without spilling it down my front. But inside this broken, decaying shell of a 99-year-old body, the woman I was 40 years ago is still fully awake. She is screaming, she is weeping, and she is begging for a chance to go back and undo the catastrophic choice that sealed her fate. Let me take you back. Let me take you back to a time when I wasn't a burden. Let me take you back to when I was the centre of a universe. My husband, Arthur, died in the winter of 1998. He was a lovely, quiet, proud man. He worked on the British Railways his entire life, waking up in the freezing cold at 4:30 a.m., coming home with grease under his fingernails and coal dust in the creases of his palms. We didn't have much, but we had choices. And above all, we had our pride. In 1962, we bought a beautiful little semi-detached house in a quiet suburb called Cudden. It was a 3-bedroom property with a narrow, long back garden. To anyone else, it was just brick and mortar. To us, it was our sanctuary. We sacrificed everything for that house. We didn't go on foreign holidays. We didn't buy fancy cars. While our neighbours were buying colour televisions and modern furniture in the 70s, Arthur and I were saving every spare penny to pay off the mortgage. I remember the exact day in August 1985 when the bank sent us the final deed of release. We sat at the kitchen table, poured 2 small glasses of cheap sherry, and we cried. We owned our piece of the earth. No one could ever kick us out. We had security. Every single corner of that house held a memory. Arthur and I had painted every wall ourselves. I remember the laughter, the spilled paint on the old newspapers, the smell of gloss paint and fresh wallpaper paste. We knew every single quirk of that building. We knew that the 3rd floorboard in the hallway creaked in the key of G sharp whenever you stepped on it. We knew exactly how to wiggle the key in the front door to get the latch to catch. In the garden, Arthur had dug the soil with his bare hands, creating beautiful borders where we planted red and yellow rose bushes. Every summer, the scent of those roses would drift through the open kitchen window while I baked Sunday roasts for our 3 children, Sarah, Michael, and David. I lived for those children. I truly, deeply did. I was a mother from an era where you didn't think about your own mental health or your own self-actualization. Your children were your project, your heart, and your future. When Sarah needed piano lessons because her school teacher said she had a natural ear for music, I didn't hesitate. I cancelled my order for a new winter coat, a coat I desperately needed because the lining of my old one was shredded and the bitter wind cut right through it. And I wore that same tattered grey wool coat for 15 long years. 15 years of feeling the frost in my bones, just so my daughter could sit at a piano. When Michael and David were growing fast, blowing through the knees of their trousers every 6 months, I took on a second job. After putting them to bed, I would walk through the dark, rainy streets to a local office block and spend 4 hours scrubbing toilets, emptying heavy metal waste paper bins, and mopping floors until my lower back felt like it was on fire. Why? So they could have brand new, crisp school uniforms. So they wouldn't look poor. So they could feel equal to the wealthy kids in their classes. I pushed them. I nurtured them. I emptied my soul into them. When they grew up, they all went to university, the first generation in our family to ever do so. Arthur and I stood on the campus grounds during their graduation ceremonies, looking at them in their black gowns and mortarboards, feeling an overwhelming, intoxicating sense of pride. We thought we had won at life. We thought, we have built 3 strong, successful, loving human beings. Look at what our sacrifice has created. But here is the terrifying truth that I need you to understand. When you spend 70 years training your children to believe that your needs do not matter, when you spend a lifetime showing them that mum will always eat the smallest portion, mum will always wear the oldest shoes, and mum will always absorb all the pain so they don't have to, you are not just being a good mother, you are teaching them a highly dangerous lesson. You are teaching them that you are a resource, not a human being, and resources are meant to be used until they are completely depleted. Let us look deeply at the psychological dynamic that began to warp inside our family dynamic long before the house was ever sold. You see, when Arthur passed away in 1998, the anchor of that house was pulled up. Arthur was a quiet authority. He didn't say much, but his presence demanded a certain level of respect from the children. When he was gone, the house became a target. The children didn't see it as my fortress anymore. They began to view it as an unliquidated asset. I remember the family dinners we had in the immediate years after Arthur's passing. Sarah would come over, bringing her husband Martin. Martin was an ambitious man, always talking about investments, stock options, and the property ladder. They would sit at my table, eating the food I had cooked with my stiffening fingers, and their eyes would wander. They would look at the high ceilings, the size of the plot, the development happening down the road. "You know, Mary," Martin said to me one Sunday afternoon in 2001, casually carving into the roast beef I had prepared, "the values in Cudden are absolutely skyrocketing. A 3-bedroom semi with a garden this size is a goldmine right now. It's completely wasted on a single person who barely leaves the kitchen." I remember the cold chill that went down my spine when he said that word. Wasted. My home, the monument to my life's work, the place where I could still close my eyes and hear Arthur's heavy work boots stamping on the doormats, was being described as wasted. I looked at Sarah, expecting her to defend me, expecting her to say, "Martin, don't talk about Mum's house like that." But she didn't. She just picked up her wine glass, took a slow sip, and nodded her head in agreement. "Martin's right, Mum," she said smoothly. "The maintenance alone on an old place like this is going to start costing you a fortune. The roof will need doing in a few years. The plumbing is ancient. You're sitting on a mountain of capital while your joints are getting worse. It just doesn't make any logical sense." Logical sense. That was the language they used. They didn't use the language of family or memories or emotional stability. They brought the language of the corporate boardroom into my dining room. They began to frame my choice to stay in my own home as an act of stubborn, illogical defiance. Every single visit became an interrogation, a subtle psychological grinding down of an old woman's resolve. They would point out every speck of dust, every sticky window latch, every cracked garden tile as absolute proof that I was failing, that I was incapable, and that I was an accident waiting to happen. The psychological erosion didn't happen in a single afternoon. It was an artfully deployed, agonizingly slow campaign that lasted for nearly 18 months. They wore me down like water dripping onto sandstone, tracking away at my confidence until I genuinely began to doubt my own mind. Every time Sarah visited, she would carry out a subtle theatrical inspection of my home. If she found a single teacup left in the sink, she would sigh heavily, her face twisting into an expression of profound, performative worry. "Mum, you're letting things slide," she would whisper, her voice dripping with an artificial, suffocating tenderness that made my stomach churn. "Martin and I lose sleep over you out here all by yourself. What if you fall down those steep stairs in the middle of the night? What if you forget to turn the gas ring off on the stove? It's just not safe anymore. You need to be where people can look after you. They weaponized my own aging body against me. They took my normal, everyday senior moments, forgetting where I'd left my reading glasses or misplacing a utility bill, and blew them up into evidence of impending mental collapse. I was completely isolated. Arthur was gone. My old neighbours had either passed away or moved into sheltered housing, and the long, silent winter evenings in Cudden were starting to take a toll on my spirit. The house did feel bigger, colder, and emptier, and that is exactly what they were counting on. They waited until the loneliness had softened my defences before they moved in for the final kill. I remember the exact date, January 14th, 2003. It was a bitterly cold Tuesday, the frost thick and white on the rose bushes outside. Sarah and Michael arrived at my house together, entirely unannounced. They weren't wearing their usual casual clothes. They were dressed in smart, professional attire, carrying an air of intense, businesslike purpose. Sarah brought a box of cream cakes from the High Street bakery, a rare treat meant to soften the blow of what was coming. We sat at the kitchen table, the radiator clanking loudly in the corner. "Mom," Michael began, leaning forward and placing his large, heavy hand over mine. "We've been doing some very serious family planning. We have a proposition for you, and we won't take no for an answer, because we love you too much to see you live like this." He laid out the grand plan. I was to sell the Cudden house immediately. The market was at an all-time peak. With the proceeds of the sale, I would split the capital equally among the three of them, Sarah, Michael, and David. In return for this monumental financial gift, I would move into Sarah's massive detached four-bedroom home permanently. They would renovate the spacious back bedroom over the garage specifically for me. I would never have to worry about a utility bill, a grocery shop, or a council tax demand ever again. I would be surrounded by my grandchildren. I would be cooked for, cared for, driven to my appointments, and treated like a queen. "It's a win-win scenario, Mum," Sarah chimed in, her eyes shining with a manic, terrifying intensity. "You get to release the capital to help your children secure their own financial futures right now, when we need it most for the kids' educations and mortgages. And you get a beautiful, stress-free, luxury retirement with your own family. We'll take care of everything. You'll never be lonely again." I sat there looking at the two of them. My gut, that primal ancestral instinct that keeps us safe, was screaming at me. A cold, heavy lump of pure dread formed in my throat. "Don't do it," the voice inside my head whispered. "If you give away the bricks and mortar, you give away your shield." I looked at the kitchen walls, at the wallpaper Arthur and I had hung together, at the dent in the skirting board where Michael had crashed his tricycle 30 years ago. "I don't know, children," I stammered, my voice cracking with fear. "This is my home. Your father and I worked so hard for it. I feel safe here." Sarah's face instantly shifted. The warmth evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp edge of profound emotional manipulation. She pulled her hand back, her lower lip trembling with rehearsed offence. "I cannot believe you are being this selfish, Mum," she said, her voice dropping into a harsh, disciplinary hiss. "We are offering to completely upend our households, to integrate you into our lives out of pure, unadulterated love. Your sons are actively struggling to build their businesses. Your grandchildren need stability. And you're choosing to sit alone in a crumbling, drafty house, hoarding an asset that could save this family. Is that what Dad would have wanted? Did he break his back on the railways just so you could be stubborn? Did he break his back on the railways just so you could be stubborn? That sentence was a dagger straight through my heart. They used my dead husband's memory as a weapon to break my spirit. The maternal guilt, that old, exhausting, deeply ingrained habit of putting myself last, woke up and took control of my mind. I couldn't bear the thought of my children resenting me. I couldn't bear being called selfish by the very people I had scrubbed toilets to feed. I bowed my head, looking down at my gnarled, arthritic fingers, and I wept quietly. "All right," I whispered, surrendering my entire life with a single word. "If it helps you, I'll do it." The speed at which they moved after I said yes was dizzying. It was as if they were terrified I would wake up from the spell and change my mind. Within 48 hours, an estate agent was walking through my home, casually clicking a digital camera, measuring the rooms Arthur had built, and slap marketing our sanctuary to the highest bidder. Within 4 short weeks, the house was sold to a young, affluent couple from the city. I remember standing by the hallway coat rack during the final viewing, watching them walk through my front door. They touched the built-in wardrobes Arthur had spent 3 months handcrafting, talking right in front of me about how they were going to rip all this old-fashioned junk out to create a modern, open-plan living space. It felt like someone was pulling my teeth out one by one while I was wide awake, but I kept my mouth shut. I forced a smile because Sarah was standing right next to me, her hand firmly pressing into my lower back, literally pushing me forward. The final sale price was £245,000. In 2003, to a woman who had lived her entire life counting pennies, that was an astronomical, unimaginable sum of money. The exact day the funds cleared into my bank account, Sarah arrived at 9 a.m. sharp to drive me to the High Street Bank. I sat in a small, glass-walled office before a young financial advisor in a sharp grey suit. My hands were trembling so violently I had to tuck them under my thighs to hide the shaking as I gave him the verbal instructions. I told him to wire £81,000 directly to Sarah, £81,000 to Michael, and £81,000 to David. I kept back exactly £2,000 for myself, just a tiny safety net for wool or a new pair of slippers. The young advisor stopped typing on his keyboard. He looked at the massive figures on his screen, looked at my faded cardigan, and then looked straight into my eyes with a slight, deeply concerned frown. He was a complete stranger, yet he saw the flashing red lights clearer than I ever did. "Are you absolutely certain you want to execute these transfers today, Mrs. Miller?" he asked, his voice dropping low. "Are you sure you don't want to keep a larger emergency fund or look into a trust? £2,000 is an incredibly small cushion for a woman of your age." Before the words could even fully leave his mouth, Sarah leaned forward across his desk, her expensive gold bracelets clinking loudly against the glass. She patted my arm with a theatrical, suffocating show of affection. "Oh, she won't need a single penny more than that, young man," Sarah chirped, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "My mother is moving into our household permanently. Every single thing she could ever possibly need, her food, her clothes, her medical bills, it is all fully covered by us. She's part of our family unit now. Don't you agree that this beautiful money is much better off helping the younger generation secure their mortgages rather than just sitting in a stagnant account?" The advisor looked at Sarah, then looked back at me. He let out a long, quiet sigh, printed out the 3 separate transfer slips, and pushed them across the desk along with a heavy plastic ballpoint pen. I pulled my hands out from under my thighs. The air in the room felt incredibly thin. I looked at Sarah. She wasn't smiling anymore. She was staring down at that plastic pen like a hawk locking its eyes onto a field mouse. There was a strange, manic, terrifying intensity in her gaze that I had never witnessed in my daughter before. My heart was screaming at me to stop, to pull my hands back, to run out of that bank and back to my creaky floorboards in Cudden. But I pressed the tip of the pen to the first page. My hand shook so hard the ink jagged across the line, but I forced it through. I signed my name 3 separate times. Mary Miller, Mary Miller, Mary Miller. With those 3 simple strokes of a cheap pen, 40 years of Arthur's back-breaking labour on the railways, 40 years of my late-night shifts scrubbing corporate toilets, and every single ounce of my financial independence vanished into thin air. I was completely skint. I was entirely at their mercy. And as we walked out of that bank into the bright, crisp September afternoon, I turned to Sarah, expecting a hug. I expected a tearful thank you, a moment of deep connection, some emotional recognition of the monumental sacrifice I had just handed her on a silver platter. Instead, she didn't even look at me. She walked 3 paces ahead of me down the pavement, her eyes locked onto the glowing screen of her mobile phone, her thumbs typing furiously. The warmth was gone. The soft, sweet tone was completely gone. The transaction was finalized. The asset had been liquidated, and I had instantly become a secondary character in my own life. Moving into Sarah's house was supposed to be the beautiful beginning of my golden years. Instead, it felt like entering a cold, highly regulated, bureaucratic institution where my physical presence was tolerated only under the strictest conditions. She had allocated the tiny back bedroom over the garage for me. It was small, barely large enough to fit my old single bed and a small, scratched chest of drawers she had salvaged from a garage sale. The single window looked out over her perfectly manicured lawn, but I quickly realized that looking was the only thing I was actually allowed to do in that house. During the very first week, I desperately wanted to be useful. I couldn't bear the feeling of just sitting around like a piece of dead weight. I woke up early at 6:30 a.m., crept down the stairs trying to avoid making a sound, and began gently washing the breakfast dishes that had been left piled in the kitchen sink. I wanted to surprise her. I wanted to show them that I was still a grandmother, a helper, a valuable addition to the home. I was halfway through wiping down the marble countertops when the kitchen door swung open. Sarah stood there in her silk dressing gown, her face tight and twisted with pure irritation. "Mum, what on earth do you think you're doing?" she snapped, her voice carrying a sharp, bitter edge that pierced straight through my chest. She marched over and violently grabbed the wet dishcloth out of my arthritic fingers. "You are putting the plates in completely the wrong cupboards. And you're using way too much washing up liquid. Look at all these ridiculous bubbles. Martin and I have a very specific, expensive system for this kitchen. Please, just go back upstairs to your room or go sit quietly in the living room. You are completely underfoot here." Underfoot. That single word felt like a physical blow to my solar plexus. It knocked the wind out of me. I stood there in my slippers, my lower lip trembling, feeling an overwhelming wave of shame. "I'm sorry, Sarah," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I just wanted to help." "Well, don't," she said coldly, turning her back to me to rinse the sink. "Just relax. Let us handle it. I retreated up the stairs to my tiny bedroom, my knees aching with every step. As the long winter months dragged on, my entire world shrunk down to the 4 beige walls of that spare room. I was explicitly told by Sarah not to come down to the living room in the evenings when her husband, Martin, came home from his corporate job. He needs absolute peace and quiet after a highly stressful day at the office, Mum, she would explain to me in a hushed, disciplinary tone. He doesn't need to come home and have to make polite conversation with you. It's just easier if you stay upstairs. Every evening at 5:30 p.m, my dinner would be brought up to me on a plastic tray. It wasn't Sarah who brought it. It was my 14-year-old granddaughter, Chloe. She would kick my bedroom door open with her foot, dump the lukewarm tray onto my lap without ever making eye contact, her ears permanently plugged with white plastic headphones, and walk out without saying a single syllable. I would sit there alone in the fading twilight, eating dry chicken and lukewarm potatoes, listening to the muffled, vibrant sounds of life echoing up through the floorboards directly beneath my feet. I could hear the deep boom of Martin's laughter. I could hear the clatter of nice cutlery against expensive plates. I could hear the loud blare of the television coming from the family room. My own flesh and blood were living a beautiful, rich, connected life right below me, completely oblivious to the fact that the old woman who had entirely funded their lifestyle was upstairs starving for a single human word. They didn't hate me. That is the terrifying thing that people who haven't been through this don't understand. It would be 1,000 times easier if they openly hated me, because hate is an active emotion. Hate is something you can see, something you can fight against, something you can rage over. No, what they had for me was far more terrifying than hate. It was absolute, chilling, systematic indifference. I had become an appliance that they didn't know where to store. I was a piece of old, mismatched furniture that completely ruined their modern aesthetic. I was ghosted in my own daughter's home. And then, exactly 8 months after I had handed over every single penny of my life savings, the heavy iron axe finally fell. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon in May 2004. The rain was drumming a relentless, mocking, rhythmic beat against the small, single-paned window of my bedroom. I had been sitting in my vinyl chair for 4 hours without moving, watching the heavy grey clouds roll over the distant hills, when I heard the definitive, heavy crunch of Martin's luxury car pulling into the driveway below. Usually, the house remained entirely quiet until dinner, but today was different. Within minutes, I heard urgent, frantic, whispered voices coming from the kitchen directly beneath my bedroom floor. I couldn't make out the exact words, but the tone was incredibly tense, sharp and hurried. It sounded like a business meeting where a difficult decision was being finalized. A few moments later, the floorboards in the hallway outside my room groaned under a heavy weight. There was a knock at my door. It wasn't the casual, aggressive tap of my granddaughter. It was a slow, heavy, deliberate knock. "Come in," I said, my voice barely a raspy squeak. Sarah walked into the room. She didn't look at me at first. She walked over to my window, pretended to adjust the curtain by a fraction of an inch, and then finally turned around to face me. She didn't sit down on the chair. She stood, towering at the foot of my bed, her arms crossed tightly over her chest like a shield. The soft, loving daughter who had held my hand so tenderly at my kitchen table in Cudden 8 months ago was entirely gone. In her place stood a cold, transactional, hard-nosed landlord. "Mum," she began, clearing her throat loudly, "we need to have a very serious, practical talk. This current living arrangement, it's just not working out the way we had originally hoped." I felt my heart skip a violent beat. My chest tightened so severely that I could barely draw air into my lungs. "What do you mean, Sarah?" I whispered, my hands gripping the arms of my chair until my knuckles went white. "I've been so quiet. I stay up here out of Martin's way the entire evening. I don't make any noise, I swear I don't." "It's not about the noise, Mum," she said, rolling her eyes with a look of intense, artificial irritation. "Martin has just been awarded a massive, critical promotion at his firm, but it means he has to work from home permanently now. He needs a proper executive office, a quiet, professional space, where he can take international client calls and hold video conferences without any interruptions. And frankly, this back bedroom is the only room in the entire house that gets the proper, consistent daylight he needs." I stared up at her, completely dumbfounded, my mind spinning into a dark abyss. "But, Sarah, where am I supposed to go?" I cried out, my voice finally breaking into a sob. "I gave you my house. I gave you £81,000. You sat at my table and you told me I would live here with you permanently. You said we were a family." Sarah's face instantly hardened, her eyes turning into cold slits of ice. She threw her hands up in the air as if I was being completely psychotic and unreasonable. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Mum, do not start throwing that money in my face again. We used that money to secure this mortgage so that your own grandchildren could have a safe roof over their heads. We have given you free room and board for 8 whole months out of pure love. But Martin's career has to come first. He is the sole provider for this family. We've already done the research and found you a lovely, charming little ground floor flat just a few miles down the road. You'll have your independence back, Mum. You always used to complain about how much you missed having your own private space, didn't you?" My independence. She threw that beautiful word at me like it was a lifeline, but I knew exactly what it was. It was a noose. She had already taken the capital that could have paid for a gorgeous luxury apartment 10 times over. She had completely stripped me of my armour. She had emptied my pockets, and now she was pushing me out into the freezing cold, entirely unprotected and penniless. "The flat is £900 a month," she added casually, already turning her back to me and walking towards the door. "Martin has already signed the legal lease on your behalf. We'll come up and help you pack your 2 suitcases this weekend. It's for the best, Mom. Truly it is. You'll be 1,000 times happier in your own place." The flat they moved me into was located in a depressing grey concrete block directly adjacent to the commercial railway tracks. The walls were so paper-thin that I could hear my neighbour's television blaring trashy daytime talk shows and screaming arguments until 3 in the morning. Every single time a heavy freight train rattled down the iron tracks, the single-paned windows in my tiny kitchen would vibrate violently, making my cheap plastic plates rattle against the cupboard doors. It cost me £900 a month just to keep that miserable roof over my head. My state pension barely covered 600 of it. Every single month, I was forced to dip deep into my tiny, precious reservoir of remaining savings just to pay the landlord and buy basic groceries. Nearly £11,000 a year was draining away into nothingness. Within 2 years, My cushion was nearly gone. I stopped buying fresh meat. I stopped turning on the heating during the bitter winter months, wrapping my frail body in 3 layers of old, moth-eaten blankets instead, watching my own breath turn to thick white mist in the middle of my living room. I was utterly terrified of the utility bills. I was terrified of the day the numbers in my little bank book would finally hit 0. My children? They became total ghosts. Sarah would call perhaps once every 3 or 4 weeks, her voice rushed, distracted and shallow. "Just checking in, Mum. Glad to hear you're enjoying your beautiful independence. Got a dash, taking the kids to their private football academy." My youngest son, David, who lived up north in Manchester, didn't call at all. He sent a generic card at Christmas with a pre-printed corporate message inside. He had used his £81,000 share of my blood money to buy a massive property with a garden larger than a football pitch. Yet he couldn't afford a 50p stamp to write a personal, handwritten note to his own mother. But the absolute ultimate betrayal came from Michael in the frozen winter of 2007. He showed up at my flat entirely unannounced on a bleak Tuesday evening. When I opened the door and saw his face through the security chain, my old heart leapt with pure, desperate joy. He misses me, I thought to myself, tears pricking my eyes. He's finally come to take his old mum out for a cup of tea. I shuffled into the kitchen as fast as my bad knees would carry me, brewing a pot of tea and serving him the last 3 stale biscuits I had left in the packet. He sat on my cheap vinyl sofa, looking around the damp, cold, peeling room with a slight expression of intense disgust. He didn't ask how my health was. He didn't ask if I was warm enough in the frost. "Mum," he said, taking a quick sip of tea before setting the mug down hard on the table. "I'm in a bit of a major tight spot. The business is going through a bit of a dry spell, and I desperately need to upgrade my vehicle to keep up professional appearances with our high-end corporate clients. I'm just short of £3,000 for the dealership deposit. I know you kept a bit of cash back from the Cudden house sale. Can I borrow it? I swear on my kids' lives, Mum, I'll pay you back within 6 months max." I stared at him, my lower lip trembling violently. "Michael, I don't have £3,000. I only have about 2,500 left in my entire savings account. If I give you that, I won't have a single penny left to pay my rent next year. I'll be evicted." Michael leaned forward, his eyes narrowing, his voice taking on a hard, aggressive, manipulative edge. "Come on, Mum, don't be like that. Sarah explicitly told me you're just hoarding that cash out of pure irrational paranoia. I'm your son. I'm actively struggling here. Are you really going to let your own flesh and blood lose his livelihood over a couple £1,000? As soon as my winter commission's clear, I'll double it and give it right back to you. Trust me." He called me paranoid. He called my raw survival instinct hoarding. And once again, that toxic, deep-seated maternal guilt flared up in my chest. I couldn't bear the thought of my boy failing because of me. With a heavy heart and hot tears stinging my cheeks, I fetched my bank book, walked down to the post office with him the next morning through the freezing sleet, and withdrew £2,000. He took the crisp cash, stuffed it into his expensive leather jacket, gave me a quick, cold peck on the cheek, and walked out. That was 2007. I am sitting here today, 99 years old, and I have never seen a single, solitary penny of that money back. He didn't use it for his business. He used it to buy heated leather seats for his luxury sports car. He traded his mother's survival for a piece of status symbol. By the autumn of 2012, the inevitable catastrophic event happened. The numbers in my bank book finally reached absolute zero. I had nothing left. I couldn't even afford the loaf of white bread and the small carton of milk sitting on my kitchen counter. The landlord had already sent a red-inked final notice warning me that if the next month's rent wasn't paid in full, the bailiffs would be sent to physically remove my belongings onto the street. Panic, raw and suffocating, seized my mind. My hands shook so violently I could barely press the buttons on my old landline phone. I dialed Sarah's number, crying so hard I could barely form words. "Sarah, please, you have to help me," I sobbed into the receiver, gripping the plastic tightly. "The money is completely gone. The savings are entirely cleaned out. I can't afford the rent anymore. I don't know what to do. Please, Sarah, can I just come back to the room over the garage? I'll sleep on the floor. I won't get in Martin's way. I swear to God I won't." There was a long, chilling, agonizing silence on the other end of the line. The only sound was the distant, rhythmic, impatient clicking of Sarah's long fingernails tapping against her solid marble kitchen counter. When she finally spoke, her voice was entirely devoid of human warmth. It was flat, clinical, and completely detached. "Mum," she said, sighing heavily into the microphone, "you're being completely hysterical right now. We told you years and years ago that you needed to manage your personal budget better. Martin and I can't just keep bailing you out of financial trouble. We have our own massive expenses. The kids are going to an elite private boarding school now, and it's costing us an absolute fortune." "But the house, Sarah!" I screamed into the phone, my voice cracking with pure, unadulterated desperation. "The £245,000! I gave you everything! I have nothing left because I gave it all to you!" She snapped instantly, her tone turning venomous and sharp. "That was a legal gift, Mum, and it was over a decade ago. You can't keep throwing past gifts in our faces every single time you run out of money. Look, have you actually looked into local authority council housing? Or, well, there are some very nice care homes available now, much better than they used to be. The local council covers the entire cost if you have absolutely no assets. It's a very standard, normal procedure." I felt my stomach drop into a bottomless, icy abyss. The phone slipped from my arthritic fingers and crashed onto the floor. A care home. She wasn't just refusing to help me. She was telling me that because I was out of money, I was now the state's problem. I was no longer a mother. I was a broken liability that needed to be processed by a social worker. The day they moved me into Sunnyside Care Home in the spring of 2013 was the day I officially became a ghost. Sarah didn't even drive me there herself. She claimed she had an urgent committee meeting at her youngest child's school that she simply couldn't miss under any circumstances. Instead, she arranged for a private, low-cost minicab to pick me up from my tiny flat. The driver was a young man who didn't speak a single word of English to me. He just hoisted my 2 battered suitcases into the boot, helped my frail, trembling body into the back seat, and drove me through the grey, drizzling rain toward my final destination. When the car pulled up outside, I looked out the window and felt a cold, paralysing dread wrap its fingers around my throat. Sunnyside. It was a cruel, mocking joke of a name. The building was a massive 3-story Victorian structure made of dark, water-stained red brick. The paint on the window frames was peeling away in thick, ugly flakes, and the small front garden consisted of nothing but patchy, overgrown weeds and a single dead oak tree stretching its black, barren branches into the grey sky. A heavy, thick-set nurse met me at the door. She didn't smile. She didn't offer a single word of comfort or welcome. She checked her clipboard, saw my name and muttered, "Ah, yes, Mary Miller. Local authority funding case. Room 14, first floor. Follow me." I shuffled down the long, narrow corridor, the wheels of my old suitcases squeaking loudly against the industrial linoleum floor. The air in that hallway was thick and stagnant. It didn't feel like a home, it felt like a waiting room for the cemetery. It was a suffocating cocktail of stale urine, industrial-strength lavender bleach, and the faint, greasy odour of overboiled, mushy vegetables drifting up from the basement kitchen. When she pushed open the door to room 14, my heart shattered into a million pieces. It was a tiny, square box of a room. A narrow single bed with a thin, institutional blue mattress stood against the far wall. Next to it was a plastic bedside table and a single, high-backed vinyl armchair. No paintings on the walls, no warmth. Just a small double-glazed window that looked out directly over the gravel car park and 3 massive green commercial wheelie bins. "The council covers the basic package," the nurse said flatly, dropping my suitcases onto the floor. "Breakfast is at 8, lunch at 12, dinner at 5. If you need assistance using the toilet, press the red buzzer on the wall. Welcome to Sunnyside." She walked out, slamming the heavy fire door shut behind her. The click of that latch sounded exactly like a prison cell door locking into place. I sank down onto the hard vinyl chair, my body trembling so violently that my teeth clicked together. I looked at the bare, clinical yellow walls, and for the first time in my life, I realized the absolute magnitude of my mistake. I had traded my beautiful, warm house in Cudden, the house where I had raised my family, the house where every floorboard sang with memories, for a sterile 8-by-8-foot concrete box. And I had done it because I trusted my own children. As the years dragged on at Sunnyside, from 2013 to this very day, my world shrank down to the dimensions of room 14 and the shared television lounge down the hall. The lounge is a depressing place. It's filled with 12 high-backed vinyl chairs, arranged in a perfect circle around a massive flat-screen television that blares out continuous, deafening daytime quiz shows. Nobody really watches it. Most of the residents sit there in a state of semi-catatonia, staring blankly ahead, slumped over in their seats. The room constantly smells faintly of wet nappies and stale tea. Every now and then, a resident will let out a low, mournful sob, crying out for a relative who hasn't visited them in a decade. My children do visit me, but their visits are far worse than total abandonment. Their visits are exercises in pure, unadulterated guilt mitigation and social performance. Take my daughter Sarah, for instance. She comes to see me roughly once every 3 or 4 months. She never arrives unannounced. She always calls the care home office first to ensure she doesn't have to wait. When she steps into room 14, she doesn't take off her expensive tailored wool coat. She sits on the edge of my single bed, keeping her designer handbag firmly on her lap, as if she're afraid my poverty might somehow contaminate it. "Oh, Mum, you're looking well," she always says, her voice loud, high-pitched, and completely performative, clearly meant for the nurses passing by in the corridor. She stays for exactly 20 minutes. I know this because she constantly glances down at her expensive smartwatch, her fingers twitching with impatience. She doesn't ask me about my pain. She doesn't ask if I'm lonely. Instead, she spends the entire time talking about her latest kitchen renovation, her foreign holidays to Dubai, or the incredibly high fees she's paying for her children's university accommodation. She boasts about her wealth using the very money that was born from the sale of my house, while I sit before her in a faded, threadbare cardigan provided by a local charity shop. But the absolute peak of her hypocrisy happens just before she leaves. She pulls out her expensive smartphone, slides onto the arm of my vinyl chair, and forces her face next to mine. "Smile for the camera, Mum," she chirps. Click. She takes a photograph of us, immediately types out a caption, and uploads it to her social media accounts. I know exactly what it says, because one of the younger night nurses showed it to me on her phone once. The caption reads, "Spent a beautiful afternoon with my wonderful, resilient, 99-year-old mum at her home today. Family is everything. #blessed, #love my mom." It's an absolute lie. It's a calculated PR campaign designed to ensure her affluent friends and neighbours think she is a decent, loving, devoted daughter. She uses my frail, decaying body as a prop to earn digital praise from strangers, and the moment the photo is posted, the smile vanishes from her face. She stands up, pats my shoulder coldly, says, "Right, mustache, Martin and I have dinner plans," and she is gone. My son Michael is even worse. He came last Christmas, the first time I had seen his face in 2 whole years. He walked into my room carrying a small, cheap box of chocolates that he had clearly grabbed from the petrol station down the road 5 minutes before arriving. He didn't even bother to sit down. He stood by the window, staring down at the wheelie bins, entirely absorbed in his phone, typing text messages and checking email notifications. "Everything all right, Mum?" "Good, good," he muttered, not once making actual eye contact with me. After 15 minutes of total, agonizing silence, he cleared his throat, said he had to beat the holiday traffic, and walked out. He didn't care that his mother was completely destitute. The true reality of my absolute worthlessness to my children became terrifyingly clear just last month. It was a Tuesday night, around 2 a.m. I woke up with a sharp, burning urgency in my bladder. I pressed the red buzzer on my wall to call for a nurse to help me transfer to my frame, but the care home is notoriously understaffed at night. I waited for 10 minutes, the pain in my stomach growing unbearable. In a moment of sheer desperation and foolish pride, I decided to try and make it to the ensuite bathroom by myself. I managed to push my frail body up from the bed, my arthritic knees groaning under the strain. I took 2 agonizingly slow steps toward the bathroom door, my hands gripping the cold plaster wall for balance. But just as I reached the linoleum floor of the bathroom, my foot caught on the edge of the doorway. I lost my balance. My twisted, useless hands couldn't shoot out to break my fall. I crashed heavily onto the hard, tiled floor, my head striking the side of the porcelain toilet bowl with a sickening, hollow thud. A sharp, explosive pain shot through my skull, followed immediately by a warm, thick trickle of blood running down my forehead and pooling into my eyes. I lay there in the dark, pinned against the cold floor, unable to move, unable to drag my heavy body toward the emergency pull cord hanging across the room. I was completely helpless. I lay in my own blood for over 45 minutes, crying out in a cracked, whispery voice for a daughter who was fast asleep in her massive house 20 minutes down the road. When the night staff finally discovered me during their 3 a.m. rounds, the bathroom floor looked like a crime scene. I was rushed to the local hospital, where a tired, overworked doctor had to put 4 deep stitches into my thin, paper-like skin without adequate anaesthetic because my heart was too weak to handle heavy sedation. The hospital administration immediately rang Sarah, notifying her that her 99-year-old mother had suffered a severe head injury and was lying in an emergency ward. Do you know what my daughter said to the head nurse? She said she couldn't come to the hospital immediately because she had a catering appointment for a dinner party the next morning. She said she would come at the weekend when things quieted down. She arrived 5 days later. She walked into my room at Sunnyside, where I had been discharged, looking irritated rather than relieved. She sat for barely half an hour, staring at the thick black stitches running along my hairline. "Honestly, Mum, you need to be much more careful," she said, her voice tight with judgmental anger. "You're putting an immense amount of stress on the staff here, and you gave me an absolute heart attack when the hospital called. Just stay in your bed. Stop trying to be independent." She didn't lean forward to kiss my forehead. She didn't take my hand in hers to offer comfort. She didn't even ask me if the wound still hurt. She just treated my near-death experience as an active inconvenience to her schedule. And then she left. I lie awake at night now. The care home finally goes quiet around midnight, after the late-night medication trolleys have stopped rattling down the corridor, and the heavy fire doors have all clicked shut. I lie perfectly still on this narrow institutional bed, staring up at the white ceiling tiles, watching the red standby light of the wall-mounted television blink in the darkness. And when the silence gets too loud, my mind drifts. It always drifts back to the house in Cudden. I close my eyes, and I can literally smell the floor wax we used to buy at the corner shop. I can feel the smooth, cool wood of the banister under my palm as I walk up the stairs. I wonder who lives there now. I wonder if it's a young family, just like Arthur and I were back in 1962. I wonder if they have any idea how much blood, sweat and tears went into paying for the very roof over their heads. Do they know that the 3rd floorboard in the hallway creaks in G sharp? Or did they rip the original floorboards out to put in that modern grey laminate flooring that everyone seems to love so much these days? Do they look after the red and yellow rose bushes Arthur planted along the fence line? Or did they pave over the entire garden to create a double driveway for their cars? Probably ripped them out. People do that, don't they? They rip out the old, the weathered, and the historic, just to put in something shiny, modern, and convenient. And that is exactly what happened to me. I got ripped out of my own life. I got uprooted from the soil I had nurtured for 40 years, and I was replaced by something more convenient for my children. A home office for Martin, private school fees for the grandkids, and a luxury sports car with leather seats for Michael. I gave them the bricks and mortar that should have been my shield against the cruelty of old age, and they turned those bricks into currency for their own comfort, leaving me to rot in room 14. Here is the grand illusion. Here is the massive, devastating lie that they leave out of all those beautiful, heartwarming stories about selfless mothers and grateful, devoted children. They tell you that if you pour your entire life into your kids, if you sacrifice your clothes, your holidays, your health, and your savings for them, they will naturally be there to catch you when you fall. It is a lie. If you do not protect yourself, if you do not keep something back for your own security and your own autonomy, you will end up exactly where I am. Alone, dependent, powerless. I look at my children, and I truly believe that they love me, in their own small, distracted, superficial way. They don't wish for my death. They don't want me to suffer. But love and responsibility are two completely different things. When you are old, when your body is broken, when you are no longer fun to be around, and when you require actual physical sacrifice to care for, love does not pay the utility bills. Love does not cover the rent of a ground floor flat. Love does not stop your children from viewing your survival as a logistical burden on their weekends. Once you give away your assets, once you hand over your keys and your bank books because you think that's what good parents do, you cross a terrifying line. You surrender your power. And people, even your own flesh and blood, even the babies you carried in your womb and scrubbed toilets to feed, they treat you differently when you have no power left. You are no longer the matriarch to be respected. You are an administrative problem to be managed by social services. If you have a home, if you have savings, if you have a pension, if you have anything that gives you an independent voice and a choice in this world, you hold on to it. You hold on to it with both hands, and you never, ever let go until your pulse stops. Be generous with your children. Yes, of course. Help them when they are in a genuine crisis. Support them. Love them with every fibre of your being. But never leave yourself with nothing. Keep your house. Keep your savings. Keep your dignity. Keep the power to sit in your own living room. Look your children in the eye and say, "No, I am staying put. And if you want to see me, you pack your bags, you get in your car, and you come to me on my terms." Because the moment you make yourself completely dependent on their goodness, the mask will slide off. You will see who your children truly are when money and convenience are on the line, and I promise you, it might just break your heart into pieces. I remember when Sarah was only 7 years old. She scraped her knee on the concrete outside our kitchen. She ran to me crying, burying her wet face in my apron, and I picked her up and kissed her cheek, telling her that as long as I was alive, nothing would ever hurt her. I spent my whole life keeping that promise, breaking my own body so that her path would be smooth. Now, when I am the one bleeding on a cold bathroom floor, she cannot even miss a catering appointment to sit by my side. The cruel irony of motherhood is that you can love your children so fiercely that you completely erase yourself from their eyes. They grow up seeing you not as a person with vulnerabilities, but as an invisible foundation designed only to support their weight. And when that foundation starts to crumble, they do not reinforce it. They simply build a new house somewhere else and leave the ruins behind. Every single night, the head nurse comes into room 14 to hand me 2 small paper cups. One contains my evening heart medication, and the other contains a small sip of water. She looks down at me with an expression that is efficient but entirely empty of warmth. She sees dozens of me every single day. To her, I am just a task to be checked off a list before her shift ends. When she leaves and turns off the light, the darkness in this small box feels heavy, almost physical, pressing down against my chest until it is hard to breathe. I try to distract myself by counting the seconds as the clock on the wall ticks away. But each tick only reminds me that I am moving closer to an end that will be completely unmarked by the people I spent my life creating. My children will feel a passing pang of sadness when the phone call comes, but beneath that sadness there will be a quiet sense of relief. Relief that the logistical burden is finally over. Relief that they no longer have to feel the subtle, nagging guilt of driving past the dark brick walls of Sunnyside every weekend on their way to something better. If you are listening to this right now, please look at your own life. Look at the people around you. Do not let your love blind you to the absolute necessity of your own survival. True love does not demand that you lay yourself down in the mud so that someone else can walk over you without getting their shoes dirty. True family respects your boundaries and wishes for your independence just as much as you wish for theirs. If you give away your shield, do not be surprised when the world treats you like a target. Hold on to your assets, keep your house, guard your savings like your life depends on it, because as an old, forgotten woman sitting in room 14 can tell you, your life absolutely does. My heart is failing me now. The doctor came into room 14 this morning, looked at my medical chart, and gave me a soft, pitiful look. I have maybe a year left, if that. I know exactly how my story ends. I will die right here, on this thin institutional mattress, under these clinical yellow walls. When my breath finally stops, the staff will ring Sarah. She will say she's on her way, but she'll get stuck in traffic, or Martin will have an important meeting, or something else will come up. I will leave this world completely alone. They will inherit whatever is left of my life, which is absolutely nothing, because I already gave them everything 23 years ago. Please, love, learn from an old woman's catastrophic mistakes before the clock runs out for you too. Protect your dignity while your mind is still sharp and your body still works. Thank you ever so much for staying with me until the very end of my journey. Truly, from the bottom of my heavy, broken heart, thank you for giving an anonymous, forgotten woman a small piece of your time today. It means more to me than you will ever know. Before you close this video, please, let me know that I am not alone in this dark room tonight. How old are you? And where in the world are you listening from right now? Leave your age and your location in the comments below. It would bring an immense amount of comfort to my soul to look through them tonight, just to see how far my warning has travelled, and to know that out there in the world, someone was finally listening to me. Take care of yourselves, my dears. Protect your power. Until next time.